Alright. Hello to all. I'm here today with something a bit different. We're doing a bit of a replay cast for a viewer-submitted replay, something which we may or may not be doing all too frequently in the future. But anyhow, let's get things started. We're here today in the perspective of one Mr. Sergeant Hattie, a admitted Battleship main, so this should be interesting considering he's playing the Tier 9 American destroyer, the USS Fletcher. Now he is divved with some fellow Bonks players, one in Minnesota and the other in Alaska. Now it looks like we have pretty much 9-10 matchmaking, so he's not top tier, but there are also no tier 8s to bully, so I guess tier 9 is bottom tier in this respect. But tier 9s are for the most part quite competitive with tier 10s as long as you know what you're doing, and the Fletcher, even though it's a veteran of the game, being from one of the first two lines introduced, the American Tech Tree tier 9 destroyer, is a fairly competent destroyer even in this day and age. Now it has lost some power due to, well, more competitors being introduced to the game, but it remains a fairly competent torpedo boat and a sufficient gunboat. Now starting off, we have Thunderer, Yamato, Georgia, Jean Bar, Lepanto for the battleship lineup. More importantly, as a destroyer though, there's a Des Moines, Minotaur, Zao, Buffalo, so one pretty heavy HE source, and then 3, maybe even 4 potential radars. As for the destroyer matchup, since he is playing a destroyer, we're up against another Fletcher, so in the mirror matchup, and a Schultz, one of the tier 9 upcoming German heavy destroyer leaders, or whatever you want to call them. So he should either be even or advantaged in spotting. Now he is starting out by contesting B. As the torpedo tubes come up on the Fletcher's fairly short reload, we will be launching them out into the gap as indicated by RPF. You can see that indicator at the top of the screen kind of telling him where the closest possible or closest likely target is. Launching just one tube as the RPF shifts over, indicating that a target is moving in towards C, more than likely torping at that gap as well for any potential targets. Using this island, you'll note on the map Sleeping Giant, this island in the center of B-Cap keeps you fairly safe from any rogue torpedoes if there were, say, a Howland or some other short reload destroyer. This island shields you from taking torpedoes for the most part, which allows you to sit relatively flat broadside as he was briefly. Now it is contested, and as he reverses toward the cap, you can see the RPF torps gliding towards this Schultz, which he does outspot by quite a wide margin, dancing on the edge of his 5.8 detection range. However, unfortunately, you can see from the minimap that there's very few people that can actually help him with the Schultz. Nevertheless, the Schultz actually has fairly poor HE DPM, so the Fletcher, with its fairly competent HE DPM, could potentially win this engagement. You will note, however, that there is a Buffalo reversing out toward the rear, which could potentially cause us some problems. Just zooming in, taking some looks at what is going on. You can see the Des Moines on the other side, so there's just a Buffalo as the main threat here, but as long as he stays outside of the Buffalo's 10-kilometer radar range, should be fairly fine. Just dancing at the moment, trying to force the Schultz to smoke, more than likely. Finally, he decides to smoke up and engage. However, the Schultz has not yet fired, so it's not actually detected. His torps are coming up, which is what I presume would prompt him to scope in. He's reversing, so he does have to be a bit careful. Schultz showing off the signature. The Schultz radaring, or sorry, smoking rather, for kind of no reason in my opinion. Now, the Schultz has a German smoke, which is, well, kind of a crappy smoke, to be honest. Very relatively long cooldown, relatively short duration, unlike this long cooldown but long duration American smoke. But the destroyer is just exchanging some blind gunfire shots, moving forward to dodge those slow 53-knot Schultz torpedoes as we use the RPF to guide the torpedoes into the smoke. Let's see if we have any luck here. The Buffalo, which was standing by, still has yet to reverse into radar range. Maybe he's scared of that Montana on our side, and we do manage to start off the game with a nice off to a cracking start, shall we say, as we manage to slam the Schultz. Or Hattie, rather, manages to slam the Schultz with one of those 19,000 Alpha Fletcher torpedoes. If you look here, okay, actually I don't know why is there only 16,000? Now I could have sworn that the Fletcher has the Torpedo Alpha of 19,000, but it is quite possible that perhaps they're not upgraded. Anyhow, the Fletcher should have 19,000 Alpha torpedoes, so I'm just going to assume that these are actually the stock Fletcher torpedoes, or that the game interface is just showing me stock values in the replay file. Now, as one smoke expended, we traded it for a Schultz smoke, but of course the Schultz is now dead, so we have pretty much traded out as much as you can. Now you'll note he has 27,000 damage after just that Schultz kill, and that is because the Schultz is a bit of a thunder chunker. Des Moines pops his radar, or maybe the Buffalo, hard to say. But considering that the enemy has quite a strong foothold inside of A, probably wise not to stay here at this point. Now Hattie is moving off toward C to see if we can get some contests done. You can see that large enemy force having dispatched one of his cruisers on this side over here. Not too much else to do. Taking some shots at the enemy Fletcher, the only remaining destroyer, over the island. You can see those arcing American shells. Do you manage to score some nice skimming hits? Obviously those kinds of shots are a bit difficult, so need to adjust the lead, but he doesn't manage to fire off more than a couple of salvos, which means he's not likely to get very much more damage. An allied Des Moines does radar in the distance, but Hattie does not have shots, so we'll see if anyone else does. Oh, Fletcher loses his nerve, pushes out right into Hattie's line of fire, so we'll light him up. You can see that fairly short 3.3 second reload, even running the what I presume to be torpedo reload module in slot 6. And that fire after a combined shell hit from I think the Alaska is going to take him out. And that's our second destroyer kill, so Hattie has now managed to, with the help of his team, in this case, dispatch the second and last of the enemy's team's destroyers, which should give his team a sizable advantage. Oh, but unfortunately, looks like that Fletcher did manage to get some torpedoes off before he lands. Saturation does save his life. As I mentioned, if that Fletcher has fully upgraded torpedoes, should have about 19,000 alpha, 20,000 HP. Fletcher taking 2 Fletcher torpedoes. The only reason he survives is because of a timely damage control party. If you, in this circumstance, if you damage control even a second late, you're going to tick out to the flood. But unfortunately, thanks to those torpedoes, which I guess Hattie forgot about, or was not particularly expecting, he is going to drop to 52 HP, so we are now at maximum adrenaline rush optimization. So if we look at our gun reload, it looks like it doesn't adjust from the 3.3 stock reload, but we should be sitting at just about a 20% reduction, which should cut us down to roughly 2.7 to 2.6 second gun reload. As for the torps, well, the torps will go down from the already fairly short 90-second reload to a fairly ambitious 72-second reload. So let's see what Hattie can do with the rest of his HP. Now, thankfully, he did at least blind the enemy already by cutting up their destroyers, more or less. He has lost his allied Schultz, unfortunately, so he's the last BD. And with the abundance of raiders that remain in the game, at least two raiders still left, it's going to be a bit troublesome to approach. Now, we do have a 2-cap advantage, so Hattie doesn't have to push too aggressively, and you can see, well, the enemy team has a slightly better concave, though they are kind of focused and balled still in A still at this moment. But it's almost impossible for the enemy to retake B, even though Hattie no longer has any particularly strong radars in position outside of the Alaska, which is fairly pushed up, because the enemy team does lack those destroyers. Nevertheless, like I said, he still does have to be careful, even drifting nearby allied ships. He should be fairly careful because one stray shell and, well, just one stiff breeze, I guess, and this Fletcher that he's currently captaining will be sent down to the bottom. Now he's climbing up across the north side of the map, secondaries spraying close to this Yoshino. As I mentioned, don't want to sail close to that. Yamato fires up over there, and oh my god, he is inside Des Moines radar range. It's not very good. See if we can duck and cover. Yamato just fired recently, so hopefully he doesn't have a reload. Minotaur could be shooting at him, but apparently he is not interested at all in murdering this 52 HP Fletcher, perhaps because he's busy dodging shells from that Montana and Jean Bar, which just dropped him from about 60% health to just about 10 to 15. Hattie continuing to cut north, having outranged the fairly long duration radar as he loses yet another ship in the center. Is Yoshino going down in that crossfire created, well, by his own poor positioning. And at this point, if not for the Alaska, there would be the potential for the Minotaur to kind of body take B, but at this point it's probably going to be a battleship from the red team, if anything, that's going to be taking him out. Hattie has all his munitions loaded. A spray of semi-armor piercing shells coming up from that Lepanto as he's about to take what are probably some Yoshino 20-kilometer torpedoes, which is fairly embarrassing if you think about it, but this is the World of Warships player base after all. Lepanto closing into range, as well as the Yamato. Now they are likely to bow in fairly aggressively against Hattie's allied Minnesota, who is presumably shelling across at them back. Since there is as well a Montana and Jean Bar here. Lepanto turning in toward the center of the map, so it looks like those torps are going to be a miss for the Lepanto. They were aimed as if he was going to continue out of the border. He did just do a full turn in front of 3 battleships though, so we'll see if Hattie's allied battleships can get some punishing damage. On the other side of the map, Hattie's buddy in the Alaska, Mr. Bao Bonk, does manage to dispatch that Minotaur, probably with another timely radar pop, the Alaska of course overmatching the Minotaur's 16mm bow. So Lepanto will cleanly dodge, but looks like one of those border torps might just skim onto the Yamato unless he can use his Yamato turning circle, which actually is fairly respectable. Could have fired there if he really wanted to give away his presence here. Now he wouldn't have been spotted because the Yamato was gliding through the Lepanto. Smoke. He is quite close, operating on the kind of border of his range, but 5.8 kilometer detection means that 7 kilometers is still pretty comfy. He's a little over a kilometer in detection margin still. Hattie trying his best to get a good idea. He's torping behind the Yamato under the assumption that the Yamato is going to reverse when faced with this opposition. You can see the Yamato already slowing down, and looks like we have a pretty good read on what the Yamato is going to do. So let's see just how smart Hattie is, you know. As we said, a battleship main, so let's see if his instincts are on point as to the full behavior of the Yamato. Fletcher torps are fairly stealthy. They should be spotted with about 3 to 5 second reaction time, but unfortunately with a battleship engine, you're not really going to be starting anything. Yamato continuing to reverse. You can see that torpedo bulge absorbing a large chunk of damage, but Hattie does score 2 floods and 3 torpedo hits to pump up his damage by a fair amount. Now he does have smokescreen available, but the real question is if he smokes up, will anyone else be spotting the Yamato? And the answer is more than likely no, considering he doesn't have gun bloom at the moment, having not fired for quite some period. So even though Hattie has access to another smokescreen charge, declining to open up, probably fairly wise here at this HP, with the captain rework and the secondary rework to a lesser extent. The extended range of battleship secondaries, a single Yamato secondary is going to easily dispatch him. Looks like Hattie's aiming as though the Yamato is going to do a quote-unquote Bismarck turn, do a full turn away. Let's see if he has a good read. Yamato is currently executing that turn. Lepanto just on the edge of his torpedo range, not really going to be able to be hit, so no 2-for-1 torpedoes here. Yamato continuing to flee as a fire ticks onto his hull. Hattie not daring to open up due to his low HP as we issued earlier. Enemy team losing decidedly quite heavily at this point. They continue to bleed points, still not able to claim B. Their battleships ships in general kind of just widely spaced out, not able to execute a push, and this full turning Yamato is unfortunately going to find his escape route cut off by Hattie, although at 1000 hit points, Hattie probably could have just smoked up and greeted for a fire if necessary, even if those torpedoes did range out. Now this Lepanto is now quite body spotted. The Italian battleships not really the stealthiest, popping his speed boost here to help him reposition a little more rapidly. He does open up. Let's see if the Lepanto has any secondaries on his captain, because if he does, well, the Lepanto's range is actually fairly solid. Doesn't look like it, so no secondaries do fire off. He does score a cheeky extra 1 penetration to pump his damage up from 59,000 to 60,000. As he continues to provide spotting for his team. Now with most of the enemy team dead, unfortunately there is not going to be much else for this match, but here we can see how the effective early game allowed us to play fairly safely during the rest, and unfortunately Our viewer here did not send us a scorecard, so we can only guess at what the base experience was like, but still we see quite the exciting match, as Windows tells me that my storage may be full, featuring Sergeant Hattie here in his 42 HP Fletcher.